Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack fascinating source material to get to the heart of what matters. Today, we're diving into a truly unique text, an account that really blurs the lines between a travelogue, a spiritual quest, and maybe a peek behind the curtain of some hidden wisdom.
Yeah, it's quite something. We're exploring excerpts from H.P. Blavatsky's The Land of the Gods. Okay, and this book, it has a curious history. It first popped up anonymously back in 1887, called An Adventure Among the Rosicrucians.
Oh, anonymously first. Interesting.
Right. It was only later attributed definitively to Blavatsky herself, apparently compiled from her notes, experiences in, well, both the Himalayas and the Alps, all woven together into this one narrative.
Okay, so think of this as a journey, quite literally, to a place often called Shambhala in, esoteric traditions. The secret abode of the masters of wisdom, supposedly hidden away in some remote mountains. Our source material chronicles one traveler's alleged visit there.
Exactly. And our mission today is basically to follow this traveler's, well, extraordinary path. We want to understand the incredible claims and teachings they encounter from these adepts and explore the surprising, sometimes really challenging insights offered about, well, reality, human potential, and what true knowledge even is.
Okay, sounds like quite a trip.
Get ready, yeah, because this deep dive takes us far, far beyond the ordinary.
All right, let's jump in. So the narrative starts pretty grounded, actually. Our traveler begins conventionally enough, boarding a train, but soon leaves the smoky atmosphere of the crowded streets behind, heading out on foot into the fresh mountain air.
Right, and as they go deeper, the landscape just transforms dramatically. The valley narrows, mountains get steeper, and you get these really vivid descriptions, rustic cottages clinging to rocks, the sun hitting the snowy peaks, that feeling of leaving the everyday world behind.
Exactly. And there's this sense of being drawn almost irresistibly toward one particular mysterious valley. It leads towards a high bifurcated mountain peak whose summit was said to be inaccessible. They feel this deep longing, like something important is waiting there.
That sense of destiny, almost. And the climb itself is described with such rich sensory detail. You hear the rushing stream fading below, the forest thins out, and then you see these naked cliffs of the inaccessible mountain looming above.
Yeah, and there's that striking bit about rocks split like pieces by some giant power, with these islands of soil left like isolated tables.
It feels both real but also symbolic, doesn't it? Like nature itself is hinting at immense forces.
Totally. So after this climb, the narrator reaches a plain right before the inaccessible mountain. It's described as well-nigh treeless, just scattered with stones and rocks, almost like a silent battlefield between the bare rock giant sentinels and the struggling vegetation.
Right, this sort of harsh primordial landscape. And the source uses the Alps as an analogy here. Mentions mountains like the Wilden Kaiser, suggesting forms like Emperor Barbarossa. It really highlights how our own imagination starts shaping what we see, even in nature.
That's a great point. But then, after this starkness, the valley just opens up dramatically into this scene of almost super-terrestrial beauty, like a hidden sanctuary.
Yeah, described as a vast ocean bay closing into a natural amphitheater. Lush grass, maple trees, lakes, creeks, just idyllic.
And it's there, on that sublime mountain peak way in the distance, that the narrator spots something impossible, a building.
Right. At first, it's just like a palace, a fortress, or a monastery. But as they get closer, it resolves into this massive stone structure with a dome. It's described as unlike normal architecture, projecting windows, turrets, balconies, and verandas. It feels ancient, otherworldly.
And the entrance itself sounds really significant. Marble steps, granite pillars, and a clear inscription right over the door. You who enter here, leave all evil thoughts behind.
Sets the tone immediately, doesn't it? This isn't just any building. It requires a certain inner state.
Definitely. Inside, the vestibule has a statue of Gautama Buddha, and the walls are covered with golden inscriptions.
Representing, it says, some of the most important doctrines of the ancient sages. So it's linking this place directly to ancient wisdom traditions.
Okay, but here's where it gets, well, really strange. One wall seems to open into a vibrant tropical garden, but it's interspersed with these beautifully painted landscapes.
And the adept explains these aren't just decorations. They represent other monasteries of their order in really distant places, like one near a lake in Tibet, others in Egypt, even South America.
Egypt and South America, wow. But that's not even the strangest part, is it?
Not even close. The adept reveals these pictures have an occult quality. The narrator's told to focus on the Tibetan lamasery picture. And then, well, a door literally opens in the picture.
Wait. A door in the painting?
Yes. And a tall Indian man, a Tibetan adept the narrator recognizes from dreams, steps out of the image.
Steps out. Seriously.
Steps right out, acknowledges the narrator, then rides away back into the vision.
Okay, my mind is a little blown.
Right. And the imperator, one of the adepts there, quotes Shakespeare, "There are many things in heaven and earth which your philosophers don't understand," which pretty much sums it up. This sets the stage for just how extraordinary this place is.
No kidding. And the adept also clarifies, right? This Rosicrucian society isn't just Christian.
Exactly. The rose and cross symbols are presented as ancient, belonging to all occultists, with a deeper, secret meaning.
And there's another layer too, isn't there? About unseen influence.
Yes. The adept tells the narrator he's often been in their presence unseen, even directed the flow of their ideas for writing.
Whoa.
And claims the narrator has actually visited this place before in spirit during sleep, but the physical brain just couldn't hold the memory.
Okay, so invisible guidance, dream visits, people stepping out of paintings. This is way beyond normal experience. What about their other powers? The text mentions transforming things, alchemy.
Yes, they address that. The imperator explains it's not arbitrary magic. It's about deeply understanding and guiding universal forces.
Ah, the Miller analogy. I remember that.
Exactly. The miller doesn't create the stream, just understands how to guide its existing current.
So the adepts guide existing spiritual power with their intelligence, acting in accordance with nature's laws.
Precisely. And this leads to a really key teaching about will. It's quite counterintuitive. It's not about strengthening your own personal will, like building a muscle.
Right. It's about aligning it completely with the universal power, the universal spirit.
Yeah. The idea is thinking you have this separate individual will actually conflicts with the greater power and can even be destructive.
So your will is strongest when you basically surrender it.
When you have no will of your own, but remain in all things obedient to the law. That's the quote. Strength through alignment, not assertion.
That's a radical idea, and they demonstrate this power.
They do. The text describes the adepts dispersing a cloud just by extending their hands. It whirls and vanishes like smoke, a direct manipulation of nature's forces.
Okay, tangible proof. But then the narrator asks the obvious question, right? If you have these powers, why not fix the world?
The million-dollar question. Why not stop Nero or Caligula or the Inquisition?
Yeah.
And this is where the adept introduces this concept of a lot of justice. They say they have to observe this law, which is seen as expedient for the evolution of the race.
Expedient, okay. Which leads to the difficult idea that sometimes evils are.
Blessings in disguise is the phrase used. Necessary, in this view, to purge the organism of a nation. It's a tough concept.
Definitely. So they can advise but not force things.
Right. They can advise but can't interfere with their freedom because everyone has to create their own karma, individually and collectively. Even the suffering of martyrs, like Hypatia or Joan of Arc, is presented as having a purpose. From the blood of a martyr springs fruit in abundance. It's a very long-term evolutionary perspective.
A perspective that doesn't offer easy comfort, that's for sure. Does the text say how someone might, join this order?
Yes, and it's clear. You can't just be invited or favored. The adept says you must grow to become one through your own development. It's an internal path.
Which leads right into their view of humanity itself. There's a distinction they make.
A very stark one. They talk about mortal human beings who they see as intellectual animals living a sort of dream life, essentially asleep spiritually.
Ouch. And the alternative?
Real humans, described as celestial beings, souls dwelling temporarily within material bodies.
So there's a divine spark inside.
Exactly. This spiritual divine spark, which they liken to St. Paul's description, is what develops into the immortal human. The key idea is understanding this inner organism of the soul that allows you to guide your own growth, become your own master.
And they mention psychic locomotion. What's that?
It seems to me the ability to consciously direct your inner development and consciousness, unlike the ignorant who are chained to its place, like a plant. You can move inwardly.
So the point of life, from this perspective, isn't just surviving or being happy in the usual sense.
No, it's the soul, enjoying supreme bliss and realizing that they are everything. Mortals becoming immortal, becoming a perfect instrument for the manifestation of divine wisdom.
And they felt books like Sin's Esoteric Buddhism were important because they challenged the old idea of humans being sort of finished products.
Right, showed that body and mind can be transformed. Science, they argue, only knows the outward appearance, the shell, not the living power acting within. The real self is deeper.
Understandably, after hearing all this, the narrator just wants to stay there in this peaceful convent.
A very human reaction. But the master pushes back with another core teaching. Resistance is crucial for developing strength.
The pine tree analogy.
That's the one. Trees sheltered in a forest grow tall but weak, easily toppled. Solitary pines exposed to the wind grow strong roots and branches.
So we need challenges. We gain strength by resisting the winds of contrary opinions, the storms of passion.
Exactly. And he warns against becoming top-heavy, all intellect, no spirit or character.
Saying character is seated in the heart, not just the brain.
Right. True strength comes from mastering your inner emotional world and discovering that new and still larger world within the soul.
And the spiritually developed person is different how?
Their core, their divine principle, is eternal, self-existent, not easily shaken by external stuff. They can even create worlds within their own substance, which sounds incredible.
It really does. And what about practicalities, like setting up centers for this kind of learning? He dismisses money as the issue, right?
And completely.
Yeah.
He says adepts could make gold easily, but gold is a curse. It creates craving, turns people into devils.
So what's needed isn't funding, but
People. People who genuinely thirst after true wisdom, not just knowledge for selfish gain or comfort.
And he challenges our idea of necessities, too.
Yeah, says many are artificially created. Rising above them frees up energy for what's eternal and permanent. Just then some bells ring, calling them to eat.
Okay, so after all that deep philosophy, the story shifts gears to the alchemical laboratory. The narrator goes with Theodorus, who's suggested to be Paracelsus himself, a huge figure.
Right. And the narrator expects, bubbling vials and furnaces, but finds none of the usual stuff. Just strange things, some familiar from books, others totally new.
And Theodorus says true alchemy isn't about chemicals from a shop.
No, it's internal.
Yeah.
He claims the old books are often deliberately misleading, nonsense written to confuse the selfish.
But then he gives a demonstration, a pretty dramatic one.
It's extremely. Takes ordinary silver coins, puts them in a crucible, heats them up, then adds just a tiny pinch of this red powder, the famous red lion of the alchemists. He calls it a trinity and a unity.
And
the molten silver foams, shows these beautiful colors, and then solidifies into pure gold. Right there.
Wow. Just like that, undeniable proof.
Exactly. And when the narrator asks about the secret of the powder,
Theodore says it can't just be explained.
nope, it has to be practically acquired, and only when humanity is more spiritual. But, and this is key, he says, the germs of these powers are latent inside every person.
That's incredible. The potential is within us. So the narrator sees books there with symbols, pentagram, rose, cross, and asks if he can share them.
But Theodorus warns him off, says few would understand, compares it to throwing pearls before the swine.
Harsh, but maybe realistic from their perspective.
And he explains that occult symbols aren't simple. They have multiple layers of meaning, at least 3. Exoteric, the surface meaning, esoteric, intellectually explained, and spiritual, directly experienced through intuition. And maybe even up to 7 layers.
So just reading about it isn't enough.
Not at all. Real knowledge comes from experience. Self is the human being, he says. What you find through your own experience, that you truly know. Books are just mirrors.
Knowing the Bible by heart doesn't mean you get it.
Exactly. And he adds that the will isn't just life-giving, it can also destroy. Power comes with responsibility.
Okay, back to the garden. The beautiful, seemingly real garden. And the adept drops another bombshell.
Yeah. He reveals that those lush tropical plants,
Yeah.
they aren't real in the way we think. They're illusions.
Illusions created by imagination.
Created by the adept's imagination, costing nothing but an effort of our imagination.
But wait, the narrator touches a rose and it feels completely real, solid.
Right. And the adept clarifies. It's not his personal imagination making the rose real in that moment. It's a product of the imagination of nature. But its processes can be guided by the adept's spiritual will.
So nature itself imagines things into existence.
That's the claim. He says the entire visible world is the imagination of the universal mind.
Whoa. That's a huge metaphysical statement, and human imagination plays a role too.
A powerful one. Thoughts create forms, they say. But the life-giving power, the will, comes from the heart, not the brain. That's what animates creations.
And it's fortunate that most people's will isn't spiritually strong enough to materialize their negative thoughts.
Very fortunate, according to the adept. Otherwise, the world would be filled with living materialized monsters. It implies a huge potential power linked to our inner state.
Which ties back to symbols like the pentagram containing vast meanings.
Exactly. They represent these fundamental forces: eternity and time, God and human, angel and devil, condensations of imaginative and willful power.
So after these mind-bending ideas, the adept offers a critique of conventional science.
Yeah, pretty sharp one. Says science has advanced in physical comforts, sure, but has actually gone backward in other ways.
Claiming many inventions are made despite scientists, almost by accident.
Right. And the main point is that scientific knowledge is focused on the physical form, which is temporary and useless after death. People waste time enjoying these external things instead of developing their inner metals, that alchemical idea again, inner transformation.
And they make that radical suggestion about travel.
That psychically developed humans wouldn't need trains or telegraphs because they could travel with the velocity of thought.
Then Theodorus defines the real human again, not the body.
Not the semi-animal mechanism, but the invisible something which thinks and feels. He argues your real self is where your consciousness is focused, not necessarily stuck in the brain.
And the universal mind is organized. It doesn't need a physical brain to think.
That's the assertion. The universal mind is the highest organized principle. Spirit doesn't require the physical brain. He uses the example of a somnambulist traveling in spirit.
So how do you understand nature's organization?
Study your own constitution, especially the psychological aspect, the physiology of your soul. Learn to concentrate consciousness anywhere in your body, in nature.
These are definitely ideas that challenge conventional science.
Oh, absolutely. The adept acknowledges scientists cannot see beyond the narrow systems they have created. Says these truths won't be accepted now, but will be known later. Connects it to ignorance and self-conceit.
And back to the heart versus brain idea.
Right. Intellectuals often live just in the top story, the brain, neglecting the heart, the center of life. For spiritual growth, you need to try to think with their hearts, sink consciousness there, and perceive a light revealing past, present, future.
Which is connected to the fall of man. Losing that connection.
Yeah, losing alignment with the universal will and imagination. Seeing only our own illusions. To see truth, you have to give up your own limited way of thinking.
And this applies to society, too. Don't try to build wisdom by appealing to the clever and proud.
No, he quotes the Bible. Whosoever hath, to him shall be given. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away. It applies to spiritual readiness. You have to select members from the pure and virtuous, those seeking inner light, not external glory.
And the main obstacles are internal, selfish desires, these elemental forces.
Yes, these living elemental forces active within the animal principle. They can grow into these sort of inner egos that block reason. Life's main goal is this Herculean battle to make these elementals serve King Reason. But you can't win that battle just by focusing on the outside world.
Wow. Okay, so after all these teachings, we meet some really remarkable figures, Lady Adepts.
Yes, Layla and Helen. Layla explains that while it might be less common, people definitely attain adeptship in female bodies. Sometimes, she says, it's even accelerated by extraordinary suffering, like a plant forced in a hothouse. And she notes everyone has both male and female elements within.
And then Layla does something incredible, shows her past life.
Using the astral light, this subtle record projected onto a table. Scenes appear, a battlefield, a coronation, and then Layla herself being tortured and burned at the stake.
And the narrator recognizes it as Joan of Arc's story.
Exactly. And Layla confirms it. Says she is the living original, much older than she looks, as old as creation.
Joan of Arc. Alive centuries later as an adept. That's staggering.
It is. She explains her real I knows no age. It's eternal. The fire only destroyed the grossest material substance. Her astral form, her subtle body, rose above the flames, invisible to most, but seen by adepts. And later, that astral body hardened again, making her visible and tangible now.
Unbelievable. And she clarifies the voices Joan heard.
Yeah, says they weren't necessarily literal angels, but an energy merger with one of our brothers, taking a symbolic form meaningful to her. And she briefly demonstrates appearing as a luminous night.
Wow. And the other lady adept, Helen.
Described as having angelic beauty. The narrator actually recognizes her from a childhood dream where she held a lily.
She shares her story too, right? A short, tragic life.
Yes, in St. Petersburg. Died young, 17, from cold and starvation.
Yeah.
But was then received by the brothers after death.
And she gives the narrator something tangible too.
A real physical white lily bud, saying specifically it won't fade like a dream, as proof she's not just a vision.
That's beautiful. And her final teaching is really important, isn't it?
Crucial. The adepts can only assist those who protect themselves. They can influence those who are ready and approach those who spiritually approach our own sphere.
So it's about spiritual resonance, attraction.
Exactly. Love is the basis. Rising above selfishness allows you to connect with those living in the spirit. It's not about them swooping in to save everyone.
Okay, so after meeting Helen, the adept is called away, and the narrator talks to a monk, a famulus.
Right, like an attendant or disciple. And he gives a warning about false prophets and the dangers of seeking occult secrets for selfish reasons, reinforces that theme.
And the narrator asks to see elemental spirits.
Yeah, curious, right? The monk describes undines, ethereal water spirits. He even tells that cautionary tale about Count Stauffenberg marrying one and facing revenge. Suggests dealing with these forces is risky if you're not prepared.
And then the monk actually does something.
Yeah.
A ritual.
Yes, in the laboratory, a fumigation. Uses bark, leaves, charcoal, some mysterious powder. White smoke fills the room, and the narrator's reality just dissolves.
Dissolves. What happens?
He experiences his consciousness in the element of water, feels totally weightless. Then he finds himself rising to the surface of a moonlit ocean, and somehow he recognizes the coast of Sri Lanka, Adam's Peak, a place he definitely isn't physically near.
So an astral projection or something like it. And he meets beings there.
3 beautiful water nymphs appear. He understands that their language, even though it's foreign, they invite him to their underwater palace.
An underwater palace. Okay, this is deep into magical territory. What happens then?
The queen of the nymphs, described as incredibly beautiful, touches his shoulder, and at her touch, his consciousness just fades. He feels himself dissolving in the element of water.
Dissolving, and then?
And then, boom. Abrupt shift. He wakes up.
Wakes up where?
Back on the moss,
Yeah.
under the pine tree where he apparently fell asleep earlier in the narrative. Sun still in the sky, vultures circling. It seems like hardly any time has passed in the physical world.
So the immediate question is, was it all just a dream? An incredibly vivid dream?
Exactly. But then he finds the proofs.
The proofs, right. What were they again?
The real white lily bud from Helen, still fresh in his buttonhole.
Wow.
And a solid lump of actual gold in his pocket from Theodorus's transmutation demonstration.
Yeah.
Though the ruby pearls he thought he got are gone.
So tangible, physical evidence of these impossible experiences, that grounds it somehow, but also makes it weirder.
It really does, and he remembers the book Theodorus promised to send him. But now he feels he messed up, maybe. By prying into the lab's secrets, listening to the famulus, he doubts if he deserves the book anymore.
So it ends on this note of uncertainty, despite the proof. What a journey.
Absolutely. This whole account just weaves together this physical trek with these incredibly profound spiritual occult experiences.
We've touched on so much. The nature of reality as imagination, this huge potential hidden in humans' psychic powers, transcending the body.
And the demanding nature of that spiritual path. It's not easy. Plus that critique of conventional knowledge, the focus on the inner battle.
Against those selfish egos, the elementals.
Right. And this picture of a hidden brotherhood, guiding humanity not by force, but by wisdom and example, helping only those who are ready.
And the stories of Layla Joan of Arc and Helen really drive home that this path, while incredibly hard, is open. It's about inner struggle, sacrifice, regardless of who you are.
Definitely. And that ending.
Mm.
Back in the ordinary world, but clutching a lily from a spirit and gold from an alchemist, it just leaves you hanging, wondering.
So the big question for you listening now, what do you take away from this deep dive into the land of the gods?
Is the world you see around you the only reality? Or just one layer, maybe shaped by imagination, as the text suggests?
Where is your consciousness really centered? Just in your brain? Or could it be, as the Adepts claim, potentially seated in the heart or even movable?
And maybe most importantly, what are the hidden obstacles within your own soul, those elementals or egos, that might be holding you back from realizing the kind of potential described here?
This deep dive really challenges us, doesn't it? To look beyond the surface of things, to consider these hidden dimensions of reality and, well, ourselves.
Yeah, we've only scratched the surface, really. There's so much density in this text. We just hope we've given you some powerful ideas to reflect on.
See what resonates with you. Maybe look for that hidden light the Adepts talk about.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all for this deep dive. Join us next time as we unpack another stack of fascinating sources for another curious listener.